Well, hey there. Good afternoon. Live from my basement. It's the Illinoize live stream podcast. I'm Patrick Fingston. I write the Illinoize political newsletter at the Illinoize, ILLINOIZE.com. You can get our updated newsletters every day with updates and what's going on and details and insight and intel and what's happening in Illinois politics. Coming up on our show today, we'll talk to the great Rick Pearson, political reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He'll join us to talk about all sorts of things. The ComEd 4 trial, which we'll talk about, the situation in Springfield, the mood there, the Chicago mayor's race, and of course, whether Governor Pritzker is going to run for president, which he sure seems like he wants to, or at least he's leaving the door open if Joe Biden weren't to run. First, though, want to start with some of the big stories that are happening out there, and it's Wednesday, so yesterday, roughly 50-minute hearing before the state Supreme Court. Attorneys for prosecutors challenging the Safety Act said the legislature circumvented the Constitution when passing that bill in 2021. But attorneys for Governor J.B. Pritzker, Attorney General Kwame Raoul, and legislative leaders say the law eliminating cash bail should stand. The arguments Tuesday centered on two main points: whether the Constitution requires bail to be monetary, and whether the legislature was infringing on the authority of the judicial branch, the so-called separation of powers. Deputy Solicitor General Alex Hemmer said the court's decision should be, the circuit court decision, which ruled Safety Act unconstitutional, should be reversed for two main reasons: that the state is not required to use money as a condition of bail, and that the General Assembly has the right to change pretrial bail laws, and it didn't violate the separation of powers clause. So essentially, the bail issue in the Constitution, the law reads, the Constitution reads that all persons shall be bailable by sufficient sureties, which some take as meaning money and some take as meaning some other sort of guarantee. Hemmer, of course, was on that side, saying that eliminating monetary bail doesn't violate the bail clause because all the General Assembly has done is confer on criminal defendants a statutory right that exceeds the floor set by the Constitution. Justice Lisa Holder White asked, in the past, we've seen where changes have been made with respect to who is entitled to bail made through constitutional amendments. She asked, why didn't this happen here, and should it have? Hemmer said, no, Your Honor, it should not have. The General Assembly was not required to put these changes to voters in a constitutional referendum, which adds conversation about the 2014 constitutional amendment called the Crime Victims' Rights Amendment. The law essentially, or the constitutional amendment essentially granted rights to victims, but the prosecutors say that they're the ones who are representing victims in a criminal case. So they're the ones that have the rights to make challenges and advocate on their behalf. And then, of course, the separation of powers issue is a big one because it's a question of whether the legislature has the authority to tell the judicial branch how it administers itself, which I think is going to be a pretty interesting question to ask as to who has where the legislature's public policy guidance ends and where the judicial independence begins. So we spoke to quite a few legal experts after the hearing yesterday, and they were near consensus that they expect the court, especially because there's a 5-2 Democratic majority, to uphold the law, but we probably won't see a ruling for at least a couple of months. So that's the issues with the Safety Act and where we stand now. Also, the trial of the so-called ComEd 4 has kicked off in Chicago. That's the trial of the corruption trial of former Madigan confidant Mike McLean, former ComEd CEO Ann Parmajori, former ComEd lobbyist John Hooker, and Jay Doherty, lobbyist who formerly led the City Club of Chicago. In their opening statements, the federal government alleged that ComEd poured $1.3 million into payments funneled to Madigan cronies and put a Madigan-backed person on the ComEd board in exchange for lucrative legislation from 2011 to 2019. Jury selection took about 2 days. The panel of 6 women, 6 men, plus 6 alternates. Defense attorneys said they will take about 3 hours total for their opening statements, while prosecutors estimated their opening remarks will take a little over an hour. If there's still time, prosecutors said they're prepared to call their first witness by the end of today. So this is alleged. They're alleged to have, especially through McLean, who's a former legislator, essentially one of Madigan's closest confidants, that McLean was used to funnel jobs and payments from the utility to Madigan-approved consultants, so that Madigan would help them with legislation that the utility wanted passed or blocked in Springfield. So that's obviously a pay-to-play, bribery sort of case, and that one's probably going to have a lot of impact on what happens in Mike Madigan's criminal trial, if it, of course, goes to trial here in the next few months. And another big issue: Governor J.B. Pritzker has signed a law requiring paid leave for workers, all workers, beginning January 1st. It grants employees of businesses of any size 1 hour of paid leave for every 40 hours worked, up to a maximum of 40 total hours per year. The bill will provide, according to the governor, approximately 1.5 million workers paid time off. The critics of the bill have argued it hurts small business, but the governor on Monday said the mandatory paid leave law is good for both business and workers. Pritzker says these are earned days off, so it's not as if you take a job one day and all of a sudden have 5 days off. So the law provides paid leave for workers for any reason. Employees can take paid leave 90 days after starting a job and must be paid their regular hourly rate. Penalties for violation of the law start with a $500 fine. So I think you're going to hear a lot more about that one too over the next couple of months, because while some business interests like the Retail Merchants Association, the Manufacturers Association, were essentially on board, you'll probably hear some frustration, especially downstate, from some mom and pop shops that can't afford to take on paying for someone who can't come to work and still has to somehow keep their business operating. Let's bring in our friend Rick Pearson, the great political reporter for the Chicago Tribune, the guy who's got his hands in about everything happening in politics these days, and there's a lot to touch on, Rick. So let's start with the trial of the ComEd 4, Ann Parmajori and John Hooker and Jay Doherty and of course Mike McLean, who was Mike Madigan's essentially closest confidant in Springfield. What does that case mean for politics today?
Well, that's actually what the defense argument is they're trying to say that the actions that they took were just a matter of politics of doing business, politics as usual. Of course, the prosecution is saying that they were the enablers for this $200 million judgment that ComEd acknowledged was part of a plan to elicit favors and have a favorable presentation in front of Mike Madigan, the soon to be on trial former House Speaker. This is kind of basically laying the table for the Madigan trial. And if prosecutors don't achieve much success here, it brings in new issues as far as Madigan's defense.
We saw with the Blagojevich trial many years ago, or trials, I guess, that it just seemed that the idea of corruption just didn't seem to matter. It didn't really change the game. I mean, in the immediacy after Blagojevich, they added some campaign finance limits and things like that, but there wasn't a major culture change in politics. Are are we, even if these guys are all found guilty, even if Madigan is found guilty, have we, and maybe this is just the cynic in me, but are we to the point that just corruption doesn't matter?
I think that's been the way for quite a while. I mean, that it's almost, I think going back to when Blagojevich was on trial, I even wrote a piece about, and we did some polling that basically it's the cynical taxpayers of Illinois that believe that there's an expectation of corruption in this state, and that it's kind of a built-in default mindset in this state. And so, regardless of what happens, and did we learn anything from Blagojevich, those kinds of things, I mean, the issues still remain. It's money, it's power, and there's always a way for money to flow around any kind of regulations. And the fundamental thing too is that people who engage in corruption are of the mindset that they're the smartest people in the room and that they're never going to get caught.
And insert the wiretaps from Mike McLean, because I mean that's exactly how he seemed to act in some of those. As we read the transcripts, and it sounds like we'll hear some of the tapes.
McLean comes across, in this early. Obviously, we're still in jury selection, but in the lead up, McLean comes across very much like Scott Faywell in the George Ryan trial of Ryan and his campaign apparatus accepting bribes for campaign contributions. And Faywell was basically telling the feds then, well, come and get me. And I don't think there's anything more dangerous you can tell federal prosecutors than to say, come and get me.
I want to move on, to the legislature. We're in mid-March now, which, we should be maybe starting to see how things are shaping up for the final sprint to mid-May, I guess, when they're going to finish this year. What's the mood in Springfield right now? I get the sense that Democrats are very emboldened. You hear the House Democrats and their great 78 because of the success they had in the elections last year, and the new COGFA numbers are out, and the state's expecting more revenue again, even in the face of a potential recession. And of course, Republicans are just on the outside looking in, as they have been for a while, but maybe even worse now. So what's the mood? What's the feeling in Springfield as things start to shake out over the next couple of months?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, and Democrats have every reason to feel emboldened that, despite feelings of maybe a little bit of a letdown, despite the successful governor's race, you basically had a very big Democratic victories. And so you look at that, you cited the state's financial picture, which is brighter than anybody has seen it in decades. You've got another credit rating upgrade by Moody's that happened. And yeah, they are, I would say they're empowered. But I don't know about emboldened. I'm not so sure that we're going to see what would be a traditional first year of a biennial. That I think truly the focus isn't going to be as much on trying to expand programs or pass a lot of new programs or even pass a lot of new laws. I still think the fundamentals come down to budgetary and structural balance, maybe using some of this new money for enhanced programming. But I really don't know that we're going to embark on a new greater progressive agenda here.
But that seems to be the internal fight that Democrats are having right now, that you have kind of the, I don't even want to call them moderate, but maybe establishment Democrats, the Susana Mendozas of the world, and J.B. Pritzker's trying to caution fiscal restraint. but then you have this very progressive, twinge in both had the House and Senate Democratic caucuses that want government seemingly to be everything to everyone. So how are they going to balance that internal rift the Democrats have?
Well, I think, Pritzker tried to explore some of that in the realization that, the legislature and the Democrats there tried to want to do with it. But I think in the overall, his budget, I think, is pretty much what we're going to see. And I think, sure, anytime that you have the state with newfound dollars, the idea is, well, how do we spend them? And yeah, there's Susana Mendoza pushing for more money and basically almost a continuing appropriation for the rainy day fund. Again, something that the state really hasn't had. And why is $2 billion sitting in a rainy day fund when we could be doing X, Y, and Z with it? But that's been our problem in the past. That's helped get us into so much of a financial morass, is that spend, spend, spend mentality, rather than looking to try to achieve as best you can a structural balance. And I do think in the end, that's going to be the test of the Democratic leaders, and which is never a fun job of trying to herd the cats in the right direction. But I do think, there is, as you mentioned, kind of that establishment Democrat group of lawmakers that is still kind of playing wait and see on some of the more progressive legislation that's been enacted. The Safety Act and cashless bail, kind of maybe reactions in some of the more marginal districts about the assault weapons ban, those kinds of things. And I almost think, much like what the Chicago mayor's race is turning into, is whether, this might be some kind of almost a reset mode in the minds of voters over how the city and the state go forward.
You mentioned the mayor's race. Is that having, and we can talk about the race itself, but is it having any impact on Springfield? Is there any kind of a wait and see? I know there's the mayor's issue, and there's infrastructure, and there's crime, etc. What impact is the mayor's race having on the legislative session?
I think there's a little bit of a pause. I'm not sure it has that great an impact, but certainly when you're kind of in this zone of not having a mayor of Chicago. Sure, Lori is Lightfoot's still lame duck mayor, but where you don't have that kind of city agenda presentation in front of you, that also leads for a wait and see. And there's no doubt that the city counts so much on Springfield for assistance and revenue that dynamic. I mean, there are some of the obvious things that are out there that are always there as city wants and city needs. But beyond that, you don't have that external pressure of the city coming to Springfield saying, we need X, Y, and Z.
I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, that the mayor's race just kind of feels like it's exposing those fissures within the Democratic Party, that you have this Democratic Socialist kind of wing against the traditional Democrats. I mean, the Bill Clinton Democrats, which are they even Democrats at this point, that Vallis kind of fits into. And he's obviously, stuck his foot in his mouth a couple of times over the years. But how do you see this playing out? Because there's definitely a very progressive, even socialist wing of Democrats in the city, but that's not the makeup of the whole city. How do you see this shaking out?
Yeah, and frankly, that's the debate going on among your traditional voter here in the city is who do you align with? Because you do have basically extremes with Brandon Johnson, and obviously concerns about his connections with Chicago Teachers Union and what a powerful political influence they've been, and still with the mayor and school board issues over teachers and teacher contracts on the one side, plus he's been very expansive in wanting to talk about taxing the rich, those kinds of things. And then you've got Paul Vallas, who, despite billing himself as a lifelong Democrat, has really had some strong dalliances with Republicans, and raises questions about whether he really is that lifelong Democrat anymore, despite what he says.
Can you explain that to people? I mean, obviously he said that in a public access interview that he kind of felt more like a Republican. That was a lead up to potentially running for Cook County Board President against Todd Stroger, right? That wasn't necessarily I've completely changed my allegiances. It was definitely, it seemed to me, at least at the time, of more of a move of political expediency.
I think that's entirely possible, but if you look at some of the actions and associations that he's made since then, it's very evident that he has moved far to the right of what I think you would say establishment or moderate Democrats would.
As Pat Quinn's running mate would do.
Well, yeah, and in fact, Pat Quinn didn't even endorse him for mayor. He endorsed Chuy Garcia. But to me, when you go and speak to a group like a fringe right-wing group like Awake Illinois, and then claim that you didn't know who they were, even though you spoke to them twice, in this kind of climate, concerns about the FOP, its president, John Candizera, their relationship and his relationship with Donald Trump. And it's not kind of, pictures of him attending events with Darren Bailey and having his picture taken with him. Those kinds of things, I think, raise questions. That having been said, there is in the city, there's always the desire for some kind of stability, at least from the business community. Mm-hmm. And that is a kind of an overarching issue.
And they're coming in big for Vallas.
Yes. And I think when you look at that moderate Democratic voter, they're kind of looking at a Brandon Johnson, who still really is kind of a largely unknown, even though he's a Cook County commissioner. But Vallas, let's face it, if Vallas hadn't won this, gotten into this runoff, he'd be relegated to perennial candidate status. He's been around 40 years, but he is a known quantity. And I think even the wonkish background that he has might be viewed as more of a stable kind of mindset than what you don't know with Brandon Johnson. That having been said, I think this is still going to be an extremely, extremely close election.
Mm-hmm. Is Vallas the fair? Johnson is incredibly compelling, but again, the unknown quantity, the CTU is going to move into the fifth floor stuff. Whoever gets the win on that message, I think, is probably going to win the race. But is Vallas the favorite right now?
I think you would have to say that, and just by virtue of having that 1/3 support in the runoff, in the early election, to set up the runoff, that a 1/3 base floor is not a bad base to start from. But he is recruiting some aldermen. You've got obviously you have racial issues here, as always in a city election. So you've got Vallas getting Jesse White's endorsement, which was very big in assuring older Black voters, who are a very dedicated voting constituency, that it's okay to vote for Paul Vallas. And then, now we've got Kwame Raoul, the only statewide elected official to endorse Brandon Johnson. And there again, a signal to other Black voters, perhaps those who were already there and leaned more progressive, that Brandon Johnson is the person to go to.
You mentioned statewide elected officials. The governor hasn't endorsed in that race and has kind of indicated that he won't. Before we let you go, though, I wanted to bring up the governor's flirtations with national media and this. I'm not in the presidential race, but if Joe Biden isn't in the presidential race, well, maybe it's. I mean, at what point does he just need to come out and say, "Yeah, if the president doesn't run, I'm going to think about it"?
Well, let's face it, he's already said it. You don't sit for the kind of New York Times magazine style profile for without that being the intended purpose. So I mean, he has said it, and he can say whatever he wants, and I'm for Joe Biden or whatever. I think it was even in the New York Times piece where it was described as in case of emergency break glass candidate, and that's very evident. And it was you go to the New York Times because you're looking for the national audience, or you go to Politico National for that national audience, and it's very clear. And do I think he's actually running for president? Not right now, because I think Joe Biden is going to be running for re-election. But when you see things like kind of the wink, I'll bankroll the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, the purpose there isn't necessarily as much as renominating Joe Biden as it is elevating the national stature even further of J.B. Pritzker.
But Biden is notoriously late in making a lot of these decisions. I mean, he essentially almost blew all the deadlines to even get in the race in 2020, and then held the field for a long time in 2016, which helped Hillary Clinton in the end in the primary, obviously. If Biden somehow steps aside, which I don't think any of us can be realistic and think that there would be a reason for an 81-year-old guy to not want to run for president again, or not be able to run for president again. How quickly can Pritzker ramp up? I mean, I know he still has some of his campaign staff on payroll. So how quickly can he be up and running?
Oh, I think very quickly. I mean, when you look at the fact of using that phrase lifelong Democrat, but when you look at Pritzker and you look at the financial involvement he's had with candidates all across the country, where he's helped support them, as not just in congressional or federal races, but also in gubernatorial races, those kinds of things. I think the network sets itself up pretty quickly. Of course, if Biden doesn't run, the natural default turns to Kamala Harris. And that could present a whole other set of issues of Pritzker taking on, the most successful Black Democratic political office holder and seeking the White House.
Rick Pearson from the Chicago Tribune. Rick, thanks so much for the time. As always, we appreciate it. Appreciate your work, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, there's our friend Rick Pearson from the Chicago Tribune. Thanks for him taking time to sit down with us and have a chat about state and city and even some national politics, as we have a lot of balls in the air right now in politics these days. So a couple of emails that came in to mailbag@theillinoise.com. Patrick, what's your handicap of the Chicago mayor's race? We talked about that a little bit with Rick. Just in terms of the money being dumped in, it appears as if Vallis is the slight front runner, though CCU and other unions have already pushed another, $1.5 million or so into Brandon Johnson's campaign. So he's not going to be short for cash, and that will be interesting to see. The messaging will be interesting over the next few weeks, next couple of weeks before this runoff is through. And the Vallis team, and they've got Joe Trippi, who's a longtime Democratic insider operative on their team. They'll do their best to disqualify Johnson as an out of touch socialist, defund the police crazy man. And the Johnson campaign is going to make Vallis, or at least attempt to make Vallis, look like the second coming of Donald Trump. And it's going to be a lot of hyperbole from both sides. So it'll be interesting to see what cuts through to voters. If this continues to be a public safety election, the idea that the defund the police candidate will win seems a little bit out of sight for me. Another email. What can Republicans do to be relevant again? We've talked about that over the last few weeks on the newsletter, and I've had a few people pretty angry with me on the Republican side as I've talked about the civil war in the GOP, and essentially, you need candidates that can win your districts. The problem is that you have too many people winning legislative primaries or congressional primaries, or obviously statewide primaries, Darren Bailey, that don't appeal to a broad swath of the electorate, and don't have the ability to win. And while Darren Bailey and his ilk can do very well in Southern Illinois and Central Illinois, and some of these rock-ribbed red districts, those kind of candidates won't win in the suburbs, and they're going to drag Republican primary, or they're going to drag Republican candidates down with them in the same vein as a Trump or a Darren Bailey in 2020. So nominate better candidates and raise more money, and then win elections. Because if you don't win elections, you're not going to win anything. That's all our time for today. Thanks so much for taking time to listen in, whether you're here on the live stream or video feed, or downloading the traditional podcast. We really do appreciate it. You can read our new stuff every day at theillinoize.com. That's ILLINOIZE.com. And we look forward to talking to you again soon here on The Illinoize.